So, just who is Joshua? Even though God is the main character of the book of Joshua, we have to get an understanding of who Joshua is. And not all of that comes from the book of Joshua. When you get to Joshua 1, which we're going to start out with tomorrow, you need to know where this fella is coming from so that you understand all that God has already poured into him to get him ready for the assignment. So between a combination of Holman Illustrated Bible Dictionary and God's Word, we're going to do a little overview of who Joshua is. Number one, he was born in Egypt during the period of slavery. So he didn't start out with a lap of luxury, which is a good thing because he doesn't experience luxury at any point in his life. He comes from a different place than Moses. You remember Moses started out in the throne room, so to speak. He was in the upper ups of Egypt because of how he was adopted. Joshua didn't have that kind of silver spoon kind of life. He was born during the period of slavery. That's what he experienced. That's what he came out of. So he understands these Israelite people because he is one of them. He has seen the worst of the worst. He has lived through the wilderness wanderings. And he knows the promise of the promised land. He has heard about that his whole life. And is more than ready to see God fulfill that. Next, he's a member of the tribe of Ephraim, Ephraim is one of Joseph's two sons that had an allotment in the tribes of Israel. He's Moses' general. So in Exodus 17, you may remember the story of Moses and his hands lifted high. And as long as during this one particular battle, as long as his hands are lifted high, they win. And when his hands begin to fall, the army loses. And so his brother and another fella come alongside him and hold up his arms so that they win the battle. Joshua was the general in charge of the troops. So imagine being a young military man and you're out there with your strategy, you're doing what you can, but you realize pretty quickly that no matter what your people do, it's not dependent on them. It's dependent on Moses. What an incredible lesson for him to learn as a young general, to see that God was in control. He was to do his job and to do it well, but when it was all said and done, the battle truly was the Lord's. That's going to come up again and again and again in the book of Joshua. But he was in the training ground long before he was in charge. Then he was Moses' servant. He was Moses' assistant. So Exodus 24:13 says, So Moses and his assistant Joshua set out, and Moses climbed up the mountain of God. He was not only his servant, but he was right there. He was privileged to see so many things that as I sit here and I just tried to imagine what it would have been like to be Joshua. He didn't have the access to God that Moses did, but he had direct access to Moses. And where Moses went, almost always, Joshua was right there with him. When Moses went up on the mountain to receive the law, as far as was possible for him to go, Joshua was right there. And not only did Joshua have the experience of Moses being up there getting the law, and when Moses was coming down, Joshua heard the shouts, and he thought there was some sort of battle going on down in the camp. He couldn't figure out what in the world was going on. And that was when Moses was bringing down the two tablets and Aaron had formed the golden calf for them to worship. Joshua was in the midst of that. Joshua saw how Moses handled that mess. Joshua saw how Moses went directly to God and begged on behalf of his people. Joshua was there. And how important was that as he goes forward? Then, when it was time, when they were approaching the promised land, remember, Moses was not allowed to go in, but he was allowed to bring them really right to the edge. And so he sends in 12 spies, one from each of the tribes of Israel. And Joshua is one of those. And he is one of only 2 of those that brings back a report from the promised land that was through the spiritual eyes. 10 of them brought back a report from physical eyes, like, we can't do this. 2 of them brought back a report that said, God can do this. So we're going to read this part because it is so very important to understanding a story or 2 later on in the book of Joshua, as well as just understanding the character of Joshua and of Caleb. So this is Numbers 13, 25 to 33. After exploring the land for 40 days, the men returned to Moses, Aaron, and the whole community of Israel at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran. They reported to the whole community what they had seen and showed them the fruit they had taken from the land. This was their report to Moses. We entered the land you sent us to explore, and it is indeed a bountiful country, a land flowing with milk and honey. Here's the kind of fruit it produces. But, you always know you're in trouble after that. But the people living there are powerful, and their towns are large and fortified. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. The Amalekites live in the Negev, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites live in the hill country. The Canaanites live along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea and along the Jordan Valley. Here's a good but. But Caleb, which you're going to learn more about him later, but Caleb tried to quiet the people as they stood before Moses. Let's go at once to take the land, he said. We can certainly conquer it. He was seeing it through spiritual eyes. He knew what God had promised. It says, but, here's another but the other men who had explored the land with him disagreed. We can't go up against them. They are stronger than we are. So they spread the bad report about the land among the Israelites. The land we traveled through and explored will devour anyone who goes to live there. All the people we saw were huge, which wasn't the truth. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. Next to them, we felt like grasshoppers, and that's what they thought too. So you can just hear those 10 men brought back this report of, yeah, it's a great place, but we can't possibly win. Like, we are defeated before we even think about it. Whereas Caleb and Joshua, they saw it through God's eyes. You don't hear Joshua's name specifically in there, but you're going to see it right now because Moses is telling, here's what we got to work with. He says, this is Numbers 14, 28 to 30. Now tell them this, as surely as I live, declares the Lord, I will do to you the very things I heard you say. You will all drop dead in this wilderness because you complained against me, every one of you who is 20 years old or older and was included in the registration will die. You will not enter and occupy the land I swore to give you. The only exceptions will be Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. They were the only 2 that saw the land through God's eyes and knew what God had promised and remembered what God had promised and gave the good report of what God was going to do. Numbers 14:38, of the 12 who had explored the land, only Joshua and Caleb remained alive. They are the only ones that got to go into the promised land because they were the only ones that trusted God to accomplish what God had said all these years was going to be done. So this young man, Joshua, God had been working in him. God had been grooming him. He had had him right along beside Moses as Moses went through some of the most incredible things that a human being can experience, meeting with God face to face. And Moses knowing that he can't go into the promised land, he goes to God. Numbers 27, it says, Then Moses said to the Lord, O Lord, you are the God who gives breath to all creatures. Please appoint a new man as leader for the community. Give them someone who will guide them wherever they go and will lead them into battle, so the community of the Lord will not be like sheep without a shepherd. He knew him too well. And remember what happened when he was only up on the mountain long enough to get the law. He knew the tendencies of these people, and he knew they needed a strong, godly leader. The Lord replied, Take Joshua, son of Nun, who has the Spirit in him, and lay your hands on him. Present him to Eleazar the priest before the whole community and publicly commission him to lead the people. Transfer some of your authority to him so the whole community of Israel will obey him. In other words, give him some of the task and start putting the authority factor on him so that the people will begin to trust in him now. It says when direction from the Lord is needed, Joshua will stand before Eleazar the priest, who will use the Urim, one of the sacred lots cast before the Lord, to determine his will. This is how Joshua and the rest of the community of Israel will determine everything they should do. So Moses did as the Lord commanded. He presented Joshua to Eleazar the priest and the whole community. Moses laid his hands on him and commissioned him to lead the people just as the Lord had commanded through Moses. So Joshua was named Moses' successor while Moses was still alive, which is such an incredible thing because it gave them time to make the transition. Deuteronomy 31:14 through 15. Then the Lord said to Moses, The time has come for you to die. Call Joshua and present yourselves at the tabernacle so that I may commission him there. So Moses and Joshua went and presented themselves at the tabernacle, and the Lord appeared to them in a pillar of cloud that stood at the entrance of the sacred tent. Deuteronomy 31:23. Then the Lord commissioned Joshua son of Nun with these words, Be strong and courageous. You're going to hear that theme again. Be strong and courageous, for you must bring the people of Israel into the land I swore to give them. I will be with you. Deuteronomy 34:9. So Joshua son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. So the people of Israel obeyed him, doing just as the Lord had commanded Moses. So Joshua is going to be the next earthly leader of the Israelite people. He's going to have the privilege of taking them through the Jordan River into the Promised Land. But I've saved 3 of my favorite verses about Joshua for the end. So I don't want us to miss this nugget found in Exodus 33:9 through 11. So it's talking about Moses, talking about him going in to meet with God. And it says, as he went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and hover at its entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. Just the visual of this, I just can't even imagine how incredible this was. When the people saw the cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, they would stand and bow down in front of their own tents. Just an incredible moment for us who have the Holy Spirit living inside of us. It's just more than we could even imagine what it was like for only one person to meet with God. And it was a rarity at that for anybody to meet with him. Verse 11, inside the tent of meeting, the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. Moses and God had a unique relationship. Moses struggled surely at the beginning, but it is incredible to see the intimacy between them. And that is what Joshua had the privilege of witnessing again and again and again. But this is the part that really grabs my heart. Afterward, Moses would return to the camp, but the young man who assisted him, Joshua son of Nun, would remain behind in the tent of meeting. Joshua would stay behind where the presence of the Lord had been. It doesn't say exactly why. But my heart just stops when I think about what it would have been like for Joshua to realize that he was that near to the God of the universe. Oh, how important that would be as he and the Israelites begin their journey through the Jordan River to take the promised land for the Lord.